Call the meeting to order, and I'd like to respect to acknowledge that we're meeting in the traditional lands of the First Nations that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. In particular, acknowledge the history, spirituality, and the culture of the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires, known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, known collectively as the Saugeen of Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection to this area, as well as the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous people whose ancestors share these lands and waters. May we live with respect for each other on this land and live in peace and friendship with all of its diverse peoples. Make rich. Right. Prior to today's meeting, the board met in closed session to review and discuss matters that, in their opinion, fell under Section 35 of the Police Services Act, as well as the Police Services Board Bylaw number 2019-01, Section 19.1, closed items. Moving on to approval of the agenda. And at this point in time, I'd like to just add an item under 18, item K. And we'll talk about dispatch renovations. Okay, all in favor of the agendas as presented then? Garth, thank you. Brian, thank you. All in favor? Yeah, thank you. Any declaration of conflict of interest arising out of the minutes and that is listed on the agenda? Hearing none. Okay. Moving on to presentations, I think we have a presentation from Mark on crime severity index presentation.
I know Tim's in the waiting room. It shouldn't be let in.
Good morning.
Morning, Tim.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late.
That's all right. We sort of ignored the first part of it, so we're in the presentation now.
Thanks.
So good morning, everybody on the board already knows Mark Lowe, our strategic analyst, but I want to introduce Jocelyn Kazarian as well. And Jocelyn does an awful lot of work with Mark, with numbers, with niche. She's the analytics and RMS expert here in the service, and she's assisted Mark with all the UCR coding is one of the things, and that drives the reported trend numbers. So Jocelyn's here as well to observe and to provide any input if you have any questions in relation to our numbers. Thanks very much, both of you.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, board chair, board members, and chief. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to go over the annual crime statistics. As you know, each year around July and August, Stats Canada releases the previous year's annual reported crime. So this year it was released, I think it was July 27th, 2023, that the 2022 statistics were released. So just in this presentation, I thought I would highlight a few of the key crime trends, a little bit on the national crime trends to see how Owen Sound fits in with the national trends, looking at both the crime severity indices, the weighted clearance rates. In some of these slides last year, we pulled in 17 other municipal police services that serve a population of less than 50,000, similar to Owen Sound, just so that you have a little context for comparison. We'll also look at the actual volume of crime reported in Owen Sound, so you can see the numbers compared to the indices, and then just wrap it up looking at a criminal workload indicator comparison. So yeah. This infographic here is produced by Stats Canada each year now. It highlights some of the key trends occurring across the country. You can see the black dotted line is the total crime severity index. It was up for the second consecutive year in a row since the COVID pandemic. Across Canada, crime increased total crime severity went up by about 4%. You can see the breakdown by provinces below there. In Ontario, the total crime severity also went up about 4%. It was noted that the violent crime severity index across Canada rose in 2022, reaching the highest point since 2007. And the non-violent also rose, but has remained lower than prior to the pandemic. So a few interesting things here that you can see reflected also in the trends in the local trends here in Owen Sound. So this graph here is the total crime severity index for 18 municipal Ontario police services, like I said, serving a population of less than 50,000. Just as a reminder that the total crime severity index is a summary of all the violent crime and the non-violent crime, which includes property crime and other criminal code offenses. So there's various ways of looking at crime counts. This index that Stats Canada puts together includes both the volume as well as the severity of specific crimes. So the indices are a really good indicator of the change in crime over time. So similar to the national trends, you can see here Owen Sound's total crime severity index came in at 104 in 2002. It also increased, but it was up by 8% from the previous year. It's the fourth highest of these other municipal police services, behind Timmins, Cornwall, and Brockville. The one thing I do want to note that with the crime severity index, crimes like homicide that are most severe have quite a significant weighting applied to them. So this rise in 22 is with no homicides previous year, and so far this year we've had 3 homicides. So we can expect that this number will go up significantly. Next year we'll be seeing much higher numbers, I would anticipate. This next figure is the violent crime severity index. So it's only looking at crimes against persons. As far as violent crime reported to Owen Sound Police, the index declined slightly from the previous year. So it was down about 6.5%, landing at an index of 120. So although it's still relatively high, it did experience a decline. And similar to the total crime severity index, it is the 4th highest behind the same other services. And this next one is looking at non-violent crime. So it is, again, property crime and other criminal code offenses. This is where we saw the most significant increase from the previous year. So it at 99, the index rose 16% from 2021. And it was the 6th highest of these other municipal police services. So if you recall back of these 3 indices, the total, the violent, and the non-violent, Owen Sounds came in above the average for these other 18 services. So I'll just click back. So higher, so that average there, the red line, is the average of just these 18 municipal police services, but Owen Sound is landing quite significantly above the average, just for context. So this next graph here is looking at the historical crime severity index just for the Owen Sound Police Service. Going back to 2012, the dark blue bar there is the total crime. You can see it declined kind of during COVID, but is on the rise again. The violent crime has surpassed the total crime and the non-violent crime. It's been above those other indices since about 2017 and has remained above those. So I thought that was one significant point. There was a period in time, going back to 2012, 2013, 2014, where you can see the violent crime index is lower than the total and the property, but since about 2017, that violent crime severity index has remained above the other indices. And the property or the non-violent crime severity index, like the national trends, is on the rise in 2022. This next graph is looking at the weighted clearance rate. So recall that clearance rate represents the portion of criminal incidents that are cleared by charge or cleared otherwise. In this case, we like to see a higher number. Similar to the crime, there's a total weighted clearance rate, there's a violent clearance rate, and a non-violent clearance rate. So this graph here is just showing the total. Usually what we see is the violent clearance rate is higher, the non-violent is lower, and then this total lands somewhere in the middle. So in 2022, we can see that Owen Sound's total weighted clearance rate dropped down to 48%. It's kind of lands right around the average of the other municipal police services and higher than the Ontario and the Canadian benchmarks over there on the right. But it did drop from the previous year. This next graph is similar. It's kind of a historical look at those weighted clearance rates. What we saw in 2022 is all of the clearance rates decline. So for Owen Sound's total violent and non-violent crime, we saw a decline in all of those clearance rates. And most significantly, the violent clearance rate, that is the light blue at 61%. That is the lowest that we've seen it over the last 10 years. So certainly an impact on the volume of the crime that's happening. Let's see here. I'm the bearer of some bad news today. I'm sorry, but it's important to know these things, yeah. Okay, so these next couple graphs are looking at actual counts of crime. So you can see the total count of the violent crime, the property crime, and the other criminal code violations. Overall, there was an increase of about 18% in those counts from 2021. The blue bar represents the violent crime, so that in terms of total count, that went down about 3% in 2022. And then the middle bar, the dark orange, is the property crime. We saw that go up about 24%. And then the other criminal code offenses there in the 710 in the lighter orange bar, that went up about 29%. So these pie charts are looking specifically at some of the individual crime types that are changing or driving those increases. In the violent crime category, there's three there that really are the greatest volume: the assault level 1, the criminal harassment, and the uttering threats. Those have the most significant volume in this violent crime category. Of the crimes that we saw increasing most significantly, we saw the sexual assaults level 1 go up by about 83%. That's in the top right there. We saw the assault level 1s go up about 8%. And robberies, although there were a really small number of robberies there, 9, that was up by 50% from the previous year, where we only had 6 in 2021. And then in violent crime, we did see some significant decreases as well. So we saw a decrease of about 6% in assault level 2s. We saw a decrease of about 19% in those criminal harassment numbers, and uttering threats also went down by about 15%. So it does change a little bit over time, but generally these types are always the most significant ones, pushing these totals here in this category. And then in the non-violent crime category, you can see that thefts under 5,000 are a really big part of that. We saw those rise by about 27% in 2022. Frauds are also a big chunk as far as volume goes. Those went up 27%. And the administration of justice violations, also a significant part of these nonviolent crimes. So that one is interesting to look at. It includes a whole bunch of things like fail to comply with orders, fail to appear in court, and breach of probation orders. So each of those individual categories under that broader category all saw significant increases in 2022. Yeah, so just a few things of note here. This is the last slide I wanted to draw your attention to, and this is related to the criminal workload per officer. So this is a calculated indicator. This is not something that Stats Canada publishes, but what's been done here is I've taken a total count of all the reported criminal code violations, the violent, the non-violent, and the other criminal code offenses, straight count, and then divided by the authorized police officer strength by these similar police services, just for comparison. So the officer strength also comes from a Stats Canada document, and it's an average, so not every single police officer would be dealing with this average number of criminal code offenses, so it's just an average, it's an indicator. But you can see that Owen Sound does come in quite high, that in 2022, they came in with an average of 58 criminal code violations per authorized officer. And this year, it actually came in at the highest indicator compared to these other services. And you can see in Ontario and Canada, as benchmarks, it's significantly lower than what's happening in Owen Sound. So again, this is just one indicator of many other things, but we've been kind of looking at the crime stats numbers and the clearance rate. We can see that this is kind of falling into the same general trend that the workload, the criminal workload, is increasing. The other thing to keep in mind is the information in the crime stats, or reported crime stats, is only based on crime that is reported to police. We know that there's a lot of crime that goes unreported, and it's important to keep in mind with the demand on police services that this is only the criminal demand, that there's also a lot of non-criminal workload that's done by the officers, which is not captured in this at all. So things like mental health calls, check well-being, missing persons, sudden deaths, disputes, those aren't criminal offenses, but they do involve a lot of work and demand on the police service. So just keep that in mind too. This is just a snapshot of the criminal workload. So yeah, I'll just wrap it up there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And hopefully Jocelyn, with her experience in UCR coding, will be here too to shed some light.
Is it possible, sorry, if I just jumped somebody, is it possible to put this chart together excluding the administrative of justice charges, because they tend to be secondary charge, like just about every one of those will have the actual, the breach rarely gets laid as a breach alone.
It is more so now because everyone's getting released. So they're being released on conditions where they wouldn't normally be released. And we're back out breaching these people on the conditions that they are released.
Strictly on the conditions, not with another charge that,
Yeah. And also a change probably since in the last 2 or 3 years. We used to, if you caught somebody at 11 o'clock, 11:30 downtown having some drinking and you know, and not keeping the peace, you may have not failed to keep the peace, curfew violation and a drinking violation against the thing. So there'd be 3 charges. Now we may want.
but it's still a breach only. It isn't a new theft with a breach.
That is a common trend as well.
Yeah.
A new theft with a breach is a very common trend.
Yeah.
And if I could add to, Stats Canada uses a counting method they call the most serious violation. So in all of this, in their published stats, it's based on that methodology. So in a particular instance where if there was a number of charges, they would be counting the most serious violation only. So often what we found is the breaches were often not counted. So when you're seeing the numbers here, it's reflective that they were the most serious in any kind of incident. So yeah.
The one question I've always had about these statistics is that there's nothing that appears to account for the fact that, like Brockville, Owen Sound, you compare same population, yeah, one's a bedroom, one's a doubles during the day. How do you? I mean, the mayor could certainly say to the people that complain that are high statistics, you say, well, that's because we're we're not, we're twice as big as they are, even though it appears they're similar communities. I don't know how you do that.
Well,
No,
every community is unique and has their own unique characteristics that
Yeah.
may affect crime either positively or negatively. And I know when even last year when we were looking at what's a good comparator for Owen Sound, there's pros and cons to every single
Yeah.
different community. So that's why I kind of just included them all here.
I know.
And at least based on population size. So certainly, comparing yourself to other services of a comparable size is more realistic than comparing yourself to a Toronto
Sure.
or a
I hear you.
Peel region.
This might be a stupid question, but rather than focus on the peaks of the trend, what was so good about 2012, 13, and 14? Maybe draw on yours.
I mean, generally, if you look back at the trends across Canada, they were all lower 2013.
But why? Like it's only 10 years, so what's the big difference?
That would have been the economic spikes. We tend to run counter to the economy, so as we're moving into a potential recession and that sort of thing, money's tight, crime goes up. As you're coming out of it, there's lots of jobs, that sort of thing, crime goes down, so. We're always the worst of it because when nobody can afford us, we have the highest call demand, and it flips the opposite. When times are good, we don't see the thefts and domestics and things like that. They all go down because when everything's good and everybody's happy, it tends to reduce the crime and call rate. So we run opposite trends. I'm gonna guess that was right at the peak of, we were just coming out of the 2006 to 10 recession, and then everything started to pick up.
I would also suggest that weapons and use of weapons and use of firearms and everything has increased across Canada in the last 10 years exponentially. And you see that violent crime, and you see it here with 3 homicides this summer.
And another issue too, is, that I mentioned before, is the process that the court, or the stance that the court is taking, and they're not holding people in custody. So back then in 2012, 2013, people would be charged with offenses. They could even be charged with the administration of justice offenses. They would go into custody for 45 days, sometimes 60 days, and they're not out committing other offenses. Whereas now, people are on 5, 6, up to 9, 10 forms of release. They've broke the law that many times, and
Compounding.
and they're going back out on the street and committing further crimes.
And I'm not sure, Mark, that Stats Canada has any way of tracking that, which would be how much, how much of that crime rate is actually the same person being charged multiple times, because that's what we see here is we're continuously releasing and arresting for the next thing they do.
I think they're working on repeat offenders, recidivism. I think it's a very, very much a significant component to all of this.
And our records management system does have a way of viewing prolific offenders, and I can pull up based on certain offenses and who are our top 10.
And society also plays a huge part in this. Like during the COVID pandemic, crime dropped for all kinds of reasons. And as it opened up, we see crime on the rise again.
After the meth phase, before the opiate phase.
Certainly the changes in drugs legislation. Yeah.
Is there any way that Canada compares statistically with the US, for example? How do we compare crime in the world? Are we? So they ever do it? It appears to,
Yeah.
every time you turn on the news, there's more violent crime in the States, and I guess because they're a lot bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are they safer than we are?
Well, if we all carried our own guns, we'd all be safe.
Yes, I think that, or not.
My other question I think would be really interesting, looking only at on sound statistics of charges laid.
Yeah.
I'd love to know how many of those reside in on sound, and even if you use no known addresses being within on sound, and how many have addresses outside of on sound. seems our, our most violent crimes this summer, murders and things, and crazy ladies with knives seem to be from London and seem to be from elsewhere. And it'd be really interesting at some future point to know how much of the crime rate is by those who are coming.
It may sound like a bit of a broken record, but I've said it to the ministry a number of times, you see the violent crime increases in the smaller under 50,000 places because we threw a pile of money in 2019 after the summer of the gun in Toronto and the GTA. The government threw a whole pile of money into guns and gangs funding, and all they successfully did was displace those individuals to areas where they're not known and where they're relatively obscure, and they go into smaller communities. You're seeing it up north. You're seeing it at the drug trafficking into northern communities, where they're saying, "Oh, I can make more money if I drive 8 hours north and I peddle my wares here for a week." And the funding doesn't include any of those services, and now we have violence and a gun and gang problem in all those smaller communities where they didn't extend the funding, and now where's the funding for us?
Yeah. And where would that case be heard? That one lady from London just recently, that be heard at Golden Sound Court or London Court? So that just adds and compounds to our costs at the court.
Oh, yeah.
Even with the non-violent crime, with the thefts and mischiefs and things like that have gone up. It's anecdotal, but are the other social services that we're partners with and that we deal with have seen there's people showing up here on a regular basis that aren't from Owen Sound, and we're dealing with some of the same people for those offenses. They weren't originally from Owen Sound.
Brian asked that at Great Curling Club at Grey County Council about a year ago, I think. And Anne Marie Shaw said, no, majority of people that we're dealing with are from this area. Now, that will be Graham Bruce for her.
Right.
So it's possible that they're from, Picard, they're from the region, and they're coming into town, and we don't necessarily know them, but they argue that they're not coming from somewhere else.
And that was primarily the homeless though too, were they not?
Yeah. It was the homeless.
But to comment on that, the by names list for Green and Bruce County, 79% of the people on the by names list are in Owen Sound. You don't, because you can't get lunch and dinner elsewhere within Green and Bruce.
Yeah.
So 79% of those people on that by names list that they always refer to are problematic and victimized here within our community. And so you don't see those numbers in other communities within Green.
If you look at when you were looking at that slide that had all the other municipalities, the ones that are spiked like us would tend to be the ones that are the local aggregators, like Timmins, for example, where all of the other communities, you go to Timmins if you're wearing social services, psychiatric, all of that sort of stuff. So they draw in. We do it for Grey Bruce. We draw in because of that. The other ones that are up there, they all tend to be the
Go downtown London.
Strathroy doesn't have an issue because when there is, they go to London, same as Woodstock, London's where the services are. So
Okay, other question, out of the violent crimes, how many of them are homeless? Yeah, I know nobody's got the answer to that, but it just. We know they tend to be more victimized. If you're homeless, but. I'm just thinking of, the discussion in the public. And then where's the reality of meet the discussion.
There's probably a way of pulling that information because we do list them as a specific address on niche.
People are afraid to come downtown because there's homeless people and they're afraid of violence from homeless people. Are they really violent or? But that's
Interesting.
it's hard to quantify because they're not all coming out as fixed address. I mean, a lot of them will give an address, they might flop out on occasion,
But if they've been dealt with criminally and they're homeless, then we would put them as 000, not fixed address.
So also, you just mentioned that list that we have for top 10 offenders. So is there a way to know like how many are from Owen Sound and from Grey and Bruce, and how many do we have from the outside? The list of repeat.
top 10 would be
Yes.
local because they keep repeating, keeping arrested here. And these guys or any officer will be able to tell her exactly who's going to be in her list when she goes and checks it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they know the family.
And what does local mean? Because they may have come here from Markville 3 months ago,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
And that is one of the issues is, you know, looking at some of the names of the people that we're dealing with. Often they came from those outlying areas of Gray and Bruce and into the Sound. So places like Dundalk, Markdale, places like that. So not necessarily coming from outside of Gray Bruce, but they're coming into Lawrence.
Well,
Except for the thefts, I do find a lot of the thefts from the bigger stores. Because of cameras, we can't ID them because they have come from somewhere else just to do the thefting, gone back.
Those are the organized groups.
Some of the vulnerable folks that might be homeless, often we see them in these types of stats as both the offenders committing the crime, but also the victims of crimes as well. So they're kind of reflected in multiple ways. Yeah.
Can you just go to the last chart there that shows? Yeah, that one. So when I look at Cornwall at 50 and Old Sound at 58. Cornwall has a lot more officers than we do.
And their crime, they had higher crime counts.
Yeah.
So by the time you divide it out, yeah.
And the same thing with Timmins and Brockville as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of looking at the portion of crime to the authorized strength.
I think if we did a call, chart at some point with just raw calls for service, it would be very telling as well. It's an extremely busy service here, comparatively to others.
I'll highlight the fact that that contributes to officer wellness, get workload. Those type of things. You start, if you're always under the gun, and you're always busy, tied up, doing things. That's going to contribute to increased stress, increased concerns in keeping up, and there's always something else coming in, and that's an officer wellness issue.
Yeah.
And also recruiting, they're trying to get people to come to Lawrence Sound this year.
And I also think there's a report later on that shows the level of call volume increase as well. And it's significant.
And then change the drop in the clearance rate.
Yes.
So I think it's
That
reflected
reflects
along
on
with
the- reflects-
That's what I was gonna ask about. Why would that happen? On the violent crimes specifically.
Some of it reflects on officer workload, and whether or not you have the time to get back and really dig
It's
into
not getting
something,
to
and then dig into something. Some of it, you know, the violent crime, not so much, but the non-violent crime, people coming from outside the jurisdiction, to commit crimes is contributing to that drop. So those are the types of things. When an officer is going call to call, there's not a lot of time to follow up on the thing that you know what, you may have been able to do a little bit more work, or you may have been able to go around and grab video if you had time from somewhere nearby, because you think, well, on that hunch, they probably drove through this area and, you know, and found a license plate. You don't have time to do that. Just it's another call.
So do you assume, can I assume on the violent stuff then that the potentially accused, the perpetrator isn't known to the victim then?
On the unsolved violent crime, then yeah, that would mean.
Because they're known that would be solved.
Bring you to the solve.
And the increase in the sexual assaults could play into that as well. That would be violent. And if the victim declines to proceed, which we see a lot of, or is no longer compliant, that could be a big spike in the violent ones being not cleared.
Domestic assaults,
Yeah.
all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and even with the sexual assault victims, there's a lot more, well, the reporting is going up because of encouraging people to report, but also the options for victims to decide not to have increased as well, which leads to that reduction.
Any other questions?
fascinating. What do you learn from it? Gonna change the way you police?
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that if you had more resources,
That's
that's
the
certainly
thing.
one area that you can target is, you know, better clearance rates and dealing with hopefully some deterrent factor. When you're tied up and you're running call to call, or you're pulling resources from the road to assist with criminal investigations, you're just spinning your wheels and you're not able to accomplish what you would like to.
I just have a quick question and I know this might be a gap in my knowledge here and might have been discussed prior as well. So have we at time looked at investing in the speed cameras, like at known spots? Like I always see one of the cars, they're Georgian, so that's a fixed route that you see that, you know, people are going to speed there. So we are short of resources, we are short of officers, so investing with, like, most of the municipalities have it. So,
It's a municipal question.
It's a municipal.
oh, okay,
It's a municipal project, and none of them are run by the police service, they're run by the municipality.
I don't know if city councils are, but I've been assisting Lyra, we've been assisting Lyra on putting together a report for council. And
Yep.
that's that in it, so I think it's coming, if you haven't seen it already. Recommendations anyway, in terms of what that looks like.
It's a good point, though, that would free up a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's another point here is that with the criminal caseload and the other things that Mark mentioned with mental health calls, et cetera, that trying to get to traffic is another big hurdle for us. And we get the usual complaints every year around schools and things like that. It's we're stretched to the max to try and achieve all those things. So yeah, bringing in other traffic calming measures like the speed signs, speed humps, things like that. That's going to help significantly, I think, and it'll slow traffic. And we don't. The idea of putting a police officer there to do radar for a half an hour doesn't deal with the other 23 and a half hours of the day. You know, those other measures are in place 24 hours a day.
The engineered solutions have to be enhanced.
Mark, you might speak to this too, but I know when there's tons of data that's been done over the years studying police responses in certain communities, but when you start seeing those declines, they're not always linear, or they only go linear for a certain point, and then they start to really pick up speed. And it's a case where in a lot of those municipalities, crime kind of hits a tipping point where once it gets a foothold, it's very hard to eradicate. And it's like the old military thing, it's, you know, a lot easier to hold a hill than it is to take it back, kind of thing. So you really have to be cautious that, you know, a lot of times in the past where you go, oh, we'll deal with that down the road, or, you know, we're a couple more years with no increases kind of thing. We got to set, you can really get into a bit of a jackpot there if you're not keeping on top of it. So that'll be something we're keeping an eye on.
one last question. So in our last council meeting, we do have a bylaw regarding the short-term rentals. And I think there was a discussion on the noise bylaw. And the point was that police would look after it from after 4:30. And given these stats and given we are short, like,
The answer is that we cover bylaw after hours, but.
but it's not practical.
The but and the impact is the fact that any calls for service are prioritized based on need and you know, based on the seriousness, whether somebody's injured, all those different things, and the priority for a noise complaint is the lowest that we have. So if there's something else for an officer to do, it will get done first. That will get done. And it may be that call came at 8 o'clock in the morning and they drive by it, or 8 o'clock in the afternoon at night because of a noise complaint, or 9 o'clock when it's supposed to be quieted down. It may be 4 o'clock in the morning, they drive by, and as they drive by, it's now over and it's done, and drive by and clear the call to say no more noise. So will it be an effective method of dealing with it? It may be one day if it's not busy. It may be effective. Generally, there's a call queue that lasts into the early morning hours, cleaning things up. And you get one incident downtown, or you get an impaired driver And if you have an impaired driver, you've got a breath technician in here, you have the sergeant in here booking, and you have the arresting officer, and you have an officer standing by the vehicle until it's towed, so there's 4 vehicles.
That's what I'm thinking, make it.
I met with the city about the short-term
Yep.
rentals and some plans for that. And that was made abundantly clear is that if our officers are tied up on emergency calls. We can't get to the noise complaint about a short-term rental. Or concerns about whether there's too many people in the house and things like that. It's just,
Because it's people who are concerned that they call, right, and they want their concerns heard.
yeah.
Right, so we can clearly see that if that's not a possibility here,
Yeah.
then what's the plan B, right? So that they're heard and not left in distress, that I called up here and I,
Yeah, and I think that's something where you have to look outside of that by law enforcement
Yep.
happens between 8:30 and 4:30. Should it be expanded
Change.
other times so that adequate service can be dedicated to that.
And the other thing is it needs to be more, and it's not, doesn't fall to me, but my suggestion to the city has always been, it needs to be more of an enforcement as opposed to a more compliance based as I'm told now. There's never an effective carrot without a stick.
We've let the stick, we put the stick away for too long, that is something we're looking at. So moving forward, I assume this type of report would go to the community safety and well-being plan group. We've just written to them asking for their bounds, since they've got their action tables to be looking at what's going on and on sound. Clearly, there's been an increase in opiate use since 2012-13 to now, and those are stats that we wouldn't have here necessarily, but Dr. Era and the health unit would. So, you know, that's the type of stuff, the type of information that should be going to that committee. And, they should be looking at it.
Yeah, sitting on all those tables of community safety well-being plan, it's they're not at the point where they're looking at individual municipalities, and they're not at the point where they're coming up with actions other than trying to put tables in place like the crime prevention table. They're looking for people now and then plug for volunteers to sit on that, and the STAR table, the situation table, we started bringing more people there. You have to make sure that it's effective and there's options, and there are individuals here who have burned the bridges everywhere, and those individuals are generating large numbers of calls for service. The repeat offenders that are being released 7, 8, 9 times, and they fall through the cracks because nobody's looking after them. Hopefully, some of those individuals can be met with their needs if they're successful in the 14th Street funding for supportive housing and 24-hour supervision. But those are the types of things that as a community, everybody has to work together to come up with solutions. It's not we're not gonna do it alone.
And that's where there's 70 people at the table, but the action table and that part 5 of the plan, they're supposed to be able to pull together the individual groups and smaller groups and pull them together. So, you know, that's certainly the whole idea, but it's where it should be.
So the steering committee.
There's a steering committee. Yeah. So you apply to them and they ask them to set an action table on something specific. If they come back and say that they can't look at an individual community, and they're going to send it back to them and say that that's the whole idea of it. That's the whole section. That's what it says. So.
We'll say this presentation is public information, so.
Good.
If we go back to, remember they had the Hanover on Sound task force or something like that? You're on that now, or
Was,
yeah. What's going on with that now?
Came back with they came back with a report, the staff report to council, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the last we've heard of any.
Right. So that's, I was gonna say that, like all these committees that you're talking about, everybody sits around and talks and there's no action. So if you got a steering committee and you're gonna get some action, then that's what we need more than anything.
Yeah.
And if they're not gonna do it, force them to do it, because it's just a bunch of, it's a waste of time for people like you to sit in on those. It's laughable, actually. I just said that for you.
You can.
All right, any other questions for Jocelyn? Thank you, guys. Very good presentation, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jocelyn. Coming.
Interesting stuff.
All right, moving on to item number 6, confirmation of minutes of the public session held July 5th. Have a motion to accept those minutes. Brian, thank you. Second, Gary, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Any business arising out of the minutes? Back there later, read. Okay. Hearing none. Correspondence received. We received a letter from the Chamber of Commerce signed by Diane Austin, outlining the chamber had met with the city and the county regarding the issues of transportation. And it's talk about the community and local business that the current taxis and vehicles were hired by law. They suggested that our chamber bring their concerns to the police service board. I left a voicemail with Diane and tried back a number of times, but I haven't get back from her, trying to clarify on some of the things in the letter that you received in your package. Looking at it, it's pretty hard for us to address the concerns in a letter without more background. And I've not heard from the taxi owners that they're looking for any type of increase. And I'm not sure how our bylaw prohibits rideshare in the city. I did note that Paul McGrath, manager of community and business development for the city, prepared a report to the Community Development Committee on September 8th. In this report, he raised a couple of issues. He noted that our bylaw allows for ride-sharing services, but may need to be amended to accommodate the platform used, specifically talking about taxi meters in the vehicle. Well, if we move on to section 2.1 and O and 2.Q in the bylaw, it talks about that transportation companies and private transportation companies shall not include a person who facilitates carpooling to find an or taxi cab company. So the issue with the meter is a moot point, because in most cases where it's a rideshare program, it's the company like Uber or Lyft or something else who actually sets the pricing, and customers sign on to an app and they approve the ride fare before they actually get into the vehicle. I'm not sure why Youngstown Police Services were not contacted prior to the reports going out and different things, but if you agree, I can reach out to Paul McGrath and maybe add some clarification to our bylaw and exactly what it means, and maybe address some of the concerns that either the committee has or the Chamber of Commerce has.
I think basically my only response is that, and as Paul's aware, there is a bylaw. You know, it's really up to someone else to set up their business and.
But he's saying that we need to change the bylaw because it doesn't allow for it, which is not correct. He's saying that the issue is the taxi meter, and you don't have a taxi meter in an Uber type car.
Oh, okay, then that should be responded to. That went over my head.
Yeah.
I don't think the chamber thinks that, correct?
Well, I think that they've taken a loose interpretation or just not looked at it closely enough, and have gonna made up their own mind. In the chamber letter, it talks about the taxi drivers wanting an increase in fare. We have not heard anything of that. This came, I'm not opposed to looking at it. We haven't heard anything about it. So I think there needs to be some more communication with the people that are running the bylaw, as opposed to going up and making like your own decisions.
Maybe set up a meeting with the chamber.
And I've tried to, like, left a message with Diane over a week ago, and I've been calling her sporadically ever since, so it just goes to voicemail.
Okay.
I don't know enough about this, but I know that it's an issue, like, you can't get a cab in the city.
Totally, and that's,
And that's not good for any of us. I mean, I do that all summer long. I have to go and get my own kids still, and they've got 3 kids of their own.
and I guess the reason is, the issue is looking behind that, why isn't there any cabs?
Well, I'm assuming money.
We've never heard that they want an increase.
When was, okay, last time we reviewed that.
2020.
And they came, and it was them that brought it here, yes. They brought
Only
the,
3 years ago, sorry.
they brought it here. And if you look now, at least in the Bay Shore cabs that I've experienced, they have a thing pasted on the dashboard that says drivers needed, urgently
They
needed.
all have that, yeah.
Yeah, they all, I don't know about the other ones, but I know Bay Shore does it. So they can't get cabs.
And I think back then it was
Can't get
$5 anywhere in the city, but they didn't want to do that. So that's when we come up with the tariff rate, the pickup rate, and then per kilometer thereafter. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, we should be really interested in this. Because, you can't talk about drinking and driving and not talk about. It's impossible to get a cab at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it doesn't add up. Guaranteed, you've got people getting in their vehicle and driving because they can't get a cab.
But how do we force people to get into the taxi business?
Well, I don't know.
We
That's
allow
what I
for all of the
I don't
different
know
ones,
enough
Uber
about it.
list and all the different things. We've opened up our file in 2020 to allow for private hire.
Yeah.
And yet nobody's taking us up on it, because back then, we need this because we're losing money. You have not heard anyone come forth with that.
The chambers looked at it, Uber won't come to a town this size. There's somebody in Sudbury and they sent back, thank you for this letter, I think was in mind. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put a motion on the floor right now that we invite the taxi cab companies to one of our public sessions. Next meeting after that to feedback on our current taxi bylaw and review the issues that they're facing.
Good one. I'd second that because it either
Should that be here? I guess we can go
Yeah.
on bylaw.
It just seems we're behind the times. I didn't know you couldn't get Uber here, because.
Calling gas.
When we're in Toronto or we're out of town somewhere, we just don't care. We just
Yeah.
call Uber. Doesn't matter what it costs, we need a friggin' ride. It doesn't, It's just the way it
It's
is.
cheaper than the alternative,
And
right?
here we are, we've got,
Chicago, I took the subway through South Chicago to get downtown, was full after that was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
it's when you're gonna get shot.
It's $2.
There you go.
Story on that motion, is that include the chamber to attend as well? Or?
Sure, they can be invited.
Or-
Sure, yeah, why not?
Because in their letter, they did say it, ask us to look at it.
Does that answer your question? No.
No, Regis here.
Oh, reaches here, okay.
Am I okay to get them?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. You probably need a break. Sure, now, then.
I was gonna say, speaking for the mayor, we need a 5-minute break.
Yeah, I agree, so, yeah. So,
Historically, since I've been here,
Just to let you know that we're maybe on a break, but the YouTube is still live. So.
Calling it does have Uber services. I don't know.
calling it.
Yeah.
Okay.
there's another.
What's your population?
That's what I was going to ask.
Sure. It's, I think now it's over us. I think it's 24.
But they
They
have
were
Uber.
like 16.5 forever and then
on the weekends, it's the same to do.
Yeah.
If it's ready, we can.
I would need.
Today we have burnt chip brownies, hello dollies, chocolate white chip cookies, score squares, chocolate chip cookies, date squares, and lemon crinkle.
I don't know.
And I'll look up the source code and put them both together.
How are you?
$14. Okay. And then the two of those.
$10, now we need $4 more. I need $4. Four. $4. Yes.
And then I'll give that back. Okay.
Oh,
And
thank
I'll
you.
get a brownie as well.
Which one?
French brownie, yes.
Where?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's $5. $2.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
Yes, you too. Oh, what chocolate cookie you said?
We have a white chocolate chip cookie. They do have peanut butter chips in it as well. They have peanut butter chips in it as well. Is that okay? Okay.
Thanks.
Welcome. Cookies, one cookie. Yeah, so that's $5. $3.50.
Okay.
It's $1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. $3. And then you need 50 cents. Nope, 50 cents. Yeah. You get two of those?
Yeah.
You got two quarters? Two quarters for 50 cents better.
Yeah.
Half of $1. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got it. Sorry.
I'll have a small. Thank you. I don't need any change.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, time duty today. Yeah.
$2, but he said he doesn't need anything. So what do you think?
You're welcome, Whitney.
Chocolate chip. Yeah. Just a chocolate. All right. $1.50.
Feel like it's first words.
Me?
I hope you like first words.
Oh.
You're welcome. They're just 50 cents.
That's one of the sure.
Good morning.
I'll have a hello dollar.
Just the hello bar?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
$3.
I need $7.
Yeah.
Two minis. And. No, so we're gonna make
Good.
7.
Oh,
Oh, 35.
Good.
So $5. Okay, now we need 7, so we need $2 more. No, that's 10.
Geez, that turned out to be a
$2.
bad night.
Two.
Alex rough night.
Oh, yeah.
God, I had to eat too much.
$2.
I got shit when I got home.
$2.
It's been a long time since I acted up that bad.
It was a late night.
That's good.
Not good.
You can keep that.
Supposed to be growing up, becoming more mature.
No, Brian, you're still,
Okay, you put it in.
I think we also feel we are still 16, so we
Yeah.
will live with that.
One more,
Right.
am I the last one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put me in there.
I didn't really want that team.
Thank you.
Well.
Total. Okay. $5 back. $5 is $5, what's worth $5? How do you think? There's two fives.
Just one.
One five. Yeah, $5.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for back. See you next week.
Okay, ready? Yes. Yeah. Have a great day.
See you later.
See you, Kyle.
Major concession in the last one.
We should take Kyle to
Access to.
that quarter thing for University of Ireland.
Yeah.
We take him down. You can go for dinner, buy some pizza or whatever. Kind of caught me off guard. All the cruise like. Okay. Like. Oh, yeah.
Millions, what?
Every utilization.
He's a nice kid.
Resolution.
So.
Yeah.
You could see.
Reference putting this project for 2024
And also.
capital budget because we're going to spend funds, so we'll go on ours or yours and then wait, studies all transparent.
Yeah.
We just need to pull out the example update.
They're always welcome.
That's good.
$30 After the reach interruption, maybe I'll move to under new business where we have item K, which talks about dispatch. And during our closed session, we had a presentation from Brady Carver, Manager of Corporate Services. Mr. Carver presented to the board anticipated cost of renovations and relocation of the dispatch area for the second floor of the police station. After considerable discussion and review of work required, cost and some adjustments, the board is prepared to move ahead with an and approve a budget for this amount. What I'd like to do is turn it back over to Brady for a draft motion that will be vote on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we provided the update on the project that is going to come a joint project between the city and the police services staff to go through the design process, come up with a final design. And then we worked with our architect, GM Deemer and Associates, to come up with an anticipated budget based on third-party costing. The anticipated cost for this project, including the remaining architectural fees, is $806,000 to be funded from the 2024 budget for both the city. We will include it as a capital project and show the funding source from the police board and the costs that the city will be responsible for. And likewise, the police will also include this in their 2024 capital budget to reflect the actual anticipated expenses for the construction period commencing in likely early 2024. The resolution that I think summarizes this would be that the Police Services Board receives the verbal report from the City of Owen Sound Manager of Corporate Services regarding the final design, cost, and anticipated timelines for the Owen Sound Police Station Dispatch Renovation Project, and approves the Owen Sound Police Station Dispatch Renovation Project construction component to an offset cost of $806,000 to be funded from the 2024 budget.
Move,
I'm
start.
happy to make that motion.
Second.
Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Brady. Much appreciated. Yes. Okay, I guess Dwayne didn't get back on, he's still without power, pursuing that. Okay, moving on to items B, we have the Crime Stoppers of Grey Bruce Coordinators Report from April, June of 2023. And we also have the Crime Stoppers of Grey Bruce tip from the summer of 2023. Just briefly on the chairman's report, number 9. On August 24th, Sunit and I, we volunteered at the end of summer bash down at Nawash Park, hosted by Nicolet in conjunction with the Owen Sound Police Services. And Sunit, Inspector Bishop, they barbecued up a bunch of burgers and hot dogs, and Amy and I assembled them into them and sent them up to probably 2 people at least. They had a number of activities for the kids as well. They had a bouncy castle, any rides and everything else. And I think one of the highlights of the day that I saw was there was this young man in a wheelchair, and he'd never ever been in a canoe before. So between Jason Craney and Special Constable Tina, they were able to get him into the canoe and give him a ride on the Pottawatomie River. So and I'm sure I saw a beam of light in the river. I'm sure it was him smiling. So it was quite the thing to see. He was pretty impressed with that. On September 12th, Craig and I attended the Zone 5 meeting. It was held in Guelph. Lynn Have, the acting inspector general from the Inspector of Policing, gave a presentation. A copy of that presentation was supposed to be attached to the minutes of the meeting, but I haven't got it from the Secretary of Zone 5, but it will be sent out as soon as we get it. Dwayne Sprague also provided a presentation to the board on the new CSPA, and I think we all heard Dwayne talk about it earlier. It was we're probably looking at spring, it was 2024 for the new CSP. And there's a number of other things that are coming up that what I'll get to in the under governance. Under governance, April 22nd, Kayla and I met with Dave Preston. We finalized the work that was done on the policy and bylaw review, and he's provided us with a thumb drive with all of the policies on it. As far as the final policy review, Kayla will have a report on this later on. Okay. It was planned the approval to be done in September board meeting, so we'll get that straightened up a little later on in the meeting. At our October board meeting, we're going to be looking to you for recommendation on which policies you would like to see on a new website, or maybe the ones that you don't want to see on a new website. There's a report coming up on the new business that talks more about our joint project with the city, and their update on their website is coming up very shortly. As Jane talked about, or Dwayne rather talked about, the new CSPA is coming into force later on in 2024, probably spring, April timeframe. And we also talked about training. There's going to be 8 hours of mandatory training, and trust group is currently reviewing the training modules. There will be additional training over this mandatory 8 hours, and that's made available as be prescribed by the minister. And I think Dwayne also mentioned that there's no costs for the training to be borne by the ministry and the OSPSB when they put those together. One of the things that I think Dwayne didn't mention, but he mentioned at the Zone 5 meeting, that board members should now start looking at sections 27 through section 40 of the CSPA in a minimum, and as well as the draft code of conduct for police service board members. And I'll provide Kayla with the links and copies of that to send out to you after the meeting, so you have a chance to review the latest and greatest versions. Just moving on a little bit farther, September 20th, I attended the Ontario Association of Police Service Board meeting via Zoom. Some of the highlights from that meeting were membership with the new CSP and the changes to section 10 attachment board and section 5.1. There will be many changes and consolidations of boards. The OPP currently charged for service on a per property basis, and this has to be taken into consideration when developing our new membership fee structure. A communication plan is being worked on as we move forward with making recommendations on any new membership fees and the finalization of them. With the new CSPA coming out, we'll also be partnering the OSPSB is partnering with the PAO, the OACP, and the OSOPA to ensure information on the new act and associated regulation is shared and discussed. And there is a meeting scheduled right now. It's coming up in February 27th and 28th to conference. I think it's in Mississauga, Toronto, to bring all of the association boards and chiefs of police together to talk about what the new CSPA means. And topics to cover at that meeting are adequate effective policing responsibilities of the board and in chief, First Nations policing, and special constables and their employees, because as you know, there's some changes coming out as it relates to special constables. They'll talk about the Inspector General policing, complaints and misconduct investigations, discipline, suspension and independent adjudication, labor relations, and the role of the ministers. That should probably be it. Probably everyone around this table should at least consider going to that February meeting, just so they're up to the new standards that are coming out.
What's that date again? Sorry.
It was February 27th and 28th. When there's more information about that, I'll make sure that I'm made aware of it. That concludes my report. Are there any questions at the dates?
That template that was discussed at that meeting, I think is going to be valuable assistance to people, because it's pretty hard to compare the old and the new without having some guidance as to what they mean. It's a big document.
It will
Going to be a
big
big
document.
change.
Some will be almost the same, and in other cases, as you say, there will be changes, especially section 10 and section 5.1 boards.
I think more work for Dave Preston.
Yes, no doubt. Well, I think most of the policies, he's already under the ministry guidelines, and I think they might have scooped some stuff coming in from CSP, but you're right. It'll probably be, we'll have to look at it again and make sure that there's no change. That being said, I'll move on to item number 11, reports from Dr. Bishop.
Here, see where we're starting here. Investigations. Okay. Apologize in advance for the length. We are just coming back from summer, and to say we had a busy summer would be quite an understatement. So going back to June, June was just before a lot of our busy season kicked in. Breach of probation related to a registered sex offender. Basically living with a 15-year-old girl and contravention of his orders. Detective Martin assisted the Ottawa Police Service with one of their sexual assault investigations, where some of the people resided here locally. So she assisted Bruce Gray Child and Family Services with the interview on their behalf. There was a drug trafficking investigation that Detective Constable Hawk looked after, charged with a number of drug-related offenses. And just shortly after we celebrated the Pride Parade here in Owen Sound, you will have seen in the media that we had something of a letter writing campaign that was targeting members of that community. That became sort of known as the Pride Man investigation. That was basically what the signature line was at the bottom. It was a number of local residences, particularly if they were displaying pride flag, were receiving these handwritten letters. Letters through the mail, which were obviously very prejudiced and a lot of disturbing terminology used in them. We put an awful lot of time into that. It is technically still an investigation that we're continuing. Quite a number of those letters were processed fully through forensics in terms of looking for fingerprints and that sort of thing with them. That investigation is still ongoing, although it looks like the letters have slowed down. Although I've been recently contacted by a couple of local groups that want to get together because I think the hate-related offenses are continuing to be a problem here in Owen Sound. So we're going to continue working on that. They did a number of investigations to assist with uniform and related missing persons. We had a sudden death in June, which would be yet another drug overdose we believe is fentanyl related, 56-year-old Owen Sound man. And there was assistance with domestic assault. I'm not going to go into the training and meetings and that sort of thing, but they are all listed in the report. So as of the end of June, we were at 6 deaths from suspected overdoses, and in 22, so that would be at the end of June. So in all of 22, we ended up the year with 6. So we're 6 months into the year, and we were at where we were in 2022, which was a reduction from what we saw in 2021, where we had 14. So there's some thoughts that COVID obviously contributed to those kind of problems across the province, where everybody saw spikes in the overdose rates. All right, moving into July. We started off July on July 2nd with the death of a 2-year-old child, which has resulted in a fairly large investigation, which we have a 48-year-old male and 39-year-old female arrested and charged with criminal negligence causing death. Those are very significant investigations, almost to the extent of close to a homicide that requires an awful lot of work. So we got started on July 2nd with that. July 7th, we followed up with our first homicide of the summer, 47-year-old GTA male, which was deemed a homicide as a result of postmortem. We have a male charged with second-degree murder, forcible confinement, and several firearms offenses, and a female charged with accessory after the fact, forcible confinements, and firearms offenses. Both remain in custody, and the investigation is ongoing. With any of these homicide investigations, they're hugely time consuming, and for the most part, they're front loaded. In other words, we always have concerns about expiring evidence and that sort of thing. So the bulk of the work happens or has to happen very quickly, which means we have to throw a lot of bodies at it to make sure that that volume of tasks can get done in a relatively short period of time before we start losing things. So here in Owen Sound, we typically will call for OPP assistance. They will assign usually a police inspector who will be a major case manager for that. And then we generally will assign a primary investigator, file coordinator, which is the person that sort of keeps track of the mass of tasks and records, and usually an affiant as well. So there's always numerous search warrants and production orders and things. So we have somebody pretty much full time writing those. So that all started up on July 7th. 4 days later, we had homicide death of a 17-year-old Brampton male at an apartment building in Owen Sound. At the time, back in July, we had a 34-year-old Owen Sound male charged with first-degree murder. There's since been a second GTA area male that has been charged as a result of that as well. Detective Martin continued on as she could with the Pride Man investigation. And that became our basically what consumed us for the better part of the summer is homicides. We often think that the OPP have unlimited resources to be able to help us out, but various things are happening through the province. Even the major case managers that they're sending carrying multiple homicides across the province, so they're juggling not only ours but and they're getting pulled in many different directions. We had investigators here from quite far out of town simply because there's just so much going on right now, and the resources are not unlimited, so it became a big challenge. We've pulled a couple people out of patrol to assist with this. Most of our core team, as much as we put the core team in place to be looking after some of the river district issues, because of the volume of tasks, we've had to redirect them to a lot of homicide work. So moving into August, on August 17th, we had the Curry House incident. So just after 9 p.m. on the 17th, 44-year-old resident of Lone Sound died from injuries that were received as a result of an assault which happened just outside of the Curry House. Again, that homicide is ongoing. That one, as you all know, generated a lot of public support, a lot of public inquiries. We know that there's a lot of interest in this from the public. When we turn these over to a VP case manager, the media responsibilities also follow to that. So we're a little bit at the hands of the OPP in terms of determining what they release. I'll just tell you, it's a very complex case that is still getting. It's a priority investigation with us. When we are able to talk about this, I think some of the reasons for the delays and that sort of thing will become a little bit more known and understanding. But because of the nature of the investigation, not a lot can be shared with it at this point. So in relation to the second homicide, which would be the 17-year-old, a 25-year-old male, Dantea Mitchell from North York, charged with first-degree murder in August, and remains in custody. That investigation is still ongoing, and we are still going through evidence in relation to the first homicide as well. So it is a very active office down there. On any given day, you'll see a number of OPP officers usually in and out, assisting with various investigations as well, and a number of our officers having been assigned to them. They are going to consume our time for quite some period of time, and then the second piece of that will be when court starts to happen. This will be back in the same boat. So as much as we may finish the tasks at some point down the road, court for these tends to go on a very long period of time. So we're going to be feeling the effects of those three for quite some time moving forward. We have 7 deaths from suspected drug. That's because we've included one of the investigations that I spoke of before as a result of that. So, any questions on Sammy?
Number 2, first 2 homicides, are they drug related? Answer them if you can.
That would be a safe assumption. Okay, we'll move on to the auxiliary board report. Again, summer months for our auxiliary are always busy. That's when a lot of our events happen outside of the holiday season, coming up shortly. So we had 150 volunteer hours in June. June was the Special Olympics torch run, the Pride Parade, Bike Safety Blitz in the River District, Harborfest Youth Day, and Canada Day. So very busy. We also were completing a auxiliary recruit class, where we brought in a number of auxiliary members. We lost a number through COVID because we basically had a shutdown for the better part of a year or more. Can't have auxiliary officers under the circumstances, or any of the officers, just because of the separation issues and that sort of thing. And obviously special events were pretty much shut down. So we lost a number of auxiliaries. So we boosted our number back up to where we normally sit, which is roughly around 18. Pride Parade photo attached to that one. July, again, very busy down at Kelso Beach for the Harborfront and Canada Day events. total of 78 hours, which was, 78 hours spent on ride-alongs where the auxiliary members come in and assist our officers on their regular duties. Auxiliary unit were also called in to assist us with some of the homicides we had over the summer by reviewing some of the video surveillance footage. We literally have probably hundreds and thousands of hours of video from various locations that needs to be reviewed, which is, as it says, a long and tedious task. Total of 129 volunteer hours given by the auxiliary during July. And August, 124 hours. Emancipation Festival at Harrison Park. We did a fundraiser barbecue up at the Reach Center, which was very well attended. Several hundred people. The interesting one that the board chair has already mentioned is the end of summer bash with Moikwadong youth. This is now the what we call it second annual. So we started this up last year. It was very successful. We're even more successful this year. And it was great that both Sneed and John could get out and see what we do at those things and just see the public impact that's made by those. Really appreciate your assistance with the food and the burgers. It was a very busy day. And yes, I would say at least a couple hundred folks that were down there, very well received. Designations are now in for the auxiliary members, and we did their swearing-in ceremony about a week ago. Roughly about a week ago. So they've been sworn in and they are good to go. So that is the auxiliary update.
Yes, sir.
Dave, I noticed in the homicide investigation south of 6th Street, we had a police vehicle there 24/7, just kind of, is that something an auxiliary officer can do? Or is that a police officer? That's true.
Quarantine. The good news in June is we got 30.5 hours of foot patrol, 39.5 hours of bicycle patrol, as well as a number of criminal charges done by our core unit. There's a number of listed events here that they did with community partners, public health, relation to fire hazard and naloxone kits distributed to businesses in the River District. This is the Pride Parade, the World Festival, torch run, and various other events here. Barbecue event also held at Safe and Sound. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through a lot of the assistance events that they did there or the investigations. They're all listed in your board reports for your information. As we moved into July, you'll notice a substantial difference here. We have one core member that is on parental leave at the moment. We also have another core member filling in with our MHART program because our MHART officer has been off an injury. So the remaining core member was reassigned to the homicide with all duties. So you'll see we've had 1 hour foot patrol and more criminal charges, which would really just represent the first few days of July before we moved off into that. So you'll see the next 2 reports are very light. We've been using that member as one of the many that's been assisted. And it gets even worse in August, where we had 0 hours of foot patrol and 0 hours of criminal charges. Our core members fully dedicated to that. The one thing that he did do in his off time is coordinate the end of the summer bash. So a bit of the work that was put into the preparation of that was shared between Jason Cranny and our remaining core members. So there was no foot patrol, bike patrol for the month of August by core. We still had some patrol, which we Jeff will be reporting on, but as I said, it's been a tough summer for us. Have any questions on the floor reports?
Thank you, Inspector Bishop.
Yeah, so I've summarized the 3 months, June, July, and August for the stats in the interest of time here. So over June, July, August, 332 highway traffic act charges, 62 compliance reports, 253 traffic cautions, 28 liquor license act charges, 394 criminal code charges, and 355 hours of foot patrol. Even with the homicides and the reduction in foot patrol hours that Inspector Bishop had spoke of with the core team, we were still able to maintain our foot patrol numbers similar to the previous year. We had 64 ride checks over the summer with 1,528 drivers checked. And we had 8 impaired driving charges laid for the summer. For collisions, we had a total of 99 collisions over the summer. Most of them occurring on the east side, the commercial area, and as well as parking lots. That's 26 less collisions in 2023 than the same time period in 22, for a 21% decrease in collisions. So a bit of good news there.
Drivers are getting smarter.
Yeah.
They're all on vacation.
That concludes frontline patrol and collisions. Moving on to community services, Inspector Bishop had spoke of some of the events with the auxiliary report that they were involved in, but our Yippee student program was commenced again. That's a grant funded program, or the wages are covered for the hiring of 5 students for the summer period, and they assist the community service officer with various events and programs and youth engagement. One of the programs that they do is the positive ticket program, working with youth that are most at risk, local sports teams, and areas where youth frequent, basically identifying students or youth that are making positive choices and providing them with a ticket, which turns out to be a voucher for a local business. Partnering with the Junior Youth Optimist Club, Kiwanis, and the River District for a bike safety day for families and youth that was quite successful. The Inside Out program, which is a program to engage youth at Bayfield Landing, Ordnance Park, and Alpha Street on topics related to safety, making positive choices, and peer-to-peer youth engagement. Again, that the Yippee student program, having those 5 students is very important to making these programs happen. Continued partnership with Mwekwedong Native and Cultural Center, continued with the end of summer bash, which was quite successful, as you heard, supporting the Pride group in Owen Sound with the parade and festival, and continued meetings and support with the local Muslim Association. Some of the presentations that were done, bike safety for youth at Mwekwedong, community living, information as it related to safety and police matters for those folks. Owen Sound, Grey Bruce Wise, social media awareness and community safety, and with the Owen Sound attack, social media awareness and internet safety. And Jason also took part in a social media and communications course with Toronto Service during the summer, and attached some of the photos from some of the events there. We see Canada Day with our auxiliary members, the students in Buster, and the bike safety course. There's no questions, so I'll move on to lost hours in training. So these statistics reflect full-time members of the police service. There was a total of 21 members over the summer who reported sick, for a total of 325 hours. That sick time was down 98 hours over the same time period in 2022. We had 2 members on WSIB. Training was down a little bit over the summer. However, we did have a member attend the level 3 collision investigator course that now gives us 2 officers that can investigate collisions at that level. Person on from our communication staff on the CPIC terminal operator course, and we also had training for our special constables that were recently hired, and communicator training. That's it for last hours in training, and that's all my reports.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Finney. Moving on to reports on from civilian services. Chris, is that?
I will be
Yeah. You
We're starting taxi bylaw. I never have much to report on these ones. They're really just statistical to go back and forth, and they reflect the regular kind of ebb and flow of the taxi licenses and renewals, as well as the adult entertainers. They do tend to go cyclical with expiries and that sort of thing, so there really is nothing of note to look at in either of those bylaw reports. They just are all consistent with previous years. Reports. Again, we've got, we typically report to you on a number of special constable hours and the number of custodies. They are all consistent with previous years. 1,068 hours in June. 1,202 hours through July. And roughly 1,200 hours in August as well. So, and custodies are all listed there as well for your review. And on the records board report, the only thing we normally report on here is our bulk searches. Director Flinley didn't include the comparators for last year, but I pulled them just so you'd be aware. We are down in our number of bulk searches, and those are the ones we talked about earlier, which they are done for revenue here through a couple of different third-party companies. Last summer, we were running somewhere in the 9,000 range for most of the month. The 3 months this year, we're down to roughly 68, 67, 6,800. I did look into this with Director Del Matheson. She indicates there's been a number of things over the summer which would have contributed to a bit of a reduction. Something going on with Uber, where so Uber is one of the companies that the also opened up to a number of other police agencies, so there may be some. Just looking at the numbers, we also had a couple of our cell monitors redirected to some other duties as well, which may have contributed. But we'll look into that further and hopefully report at a later date, and then hopefully we'll see those numbers pick up as we start moving into the fall. Absolutely.
So the court costs, that costs are totally driven by caseload and lawyers, judges, and nothing that we have. We're just responding to provide service for.
They're all security related costs that we've discussed before because of the location of the courthouse on the responsibility of all senators.
Just for an example, on Monday, I was involved in a meeting, and it was determined that a change of venue was appropriate for an item from Washington for a homicide trial, so it was brought to Owen Sound for 6 weeks, and that will involve an extra 2 officers for 6 weeks in a couple of months for court security. That because of the change of venue out of Washington to Owen Sound, it becomes the cost of the Owen Sound police or the Owen Sound taxpayer, basically.
We can't go Walker to wherever the charge came from.
As I have explained a number of times, this is an issue that needs to be addressed by the city, as far as the municipality being on the hook for everything that happens from Tobermory to, well, now it's not even going to Walker, it's coming here, so. Any charges that are made, they come to the Owen Sound court, and all those other municipalities pay nothing for this. court security costs. It was part of the presentation of Grey County for the Owen Sound.
Yes.
And that's what.
It's definitely tied to the charge volume, so. Yeah, when you see our charge volumes go up, so those are.
And charge volumes from the OPP outside of Owen Sound. Eventually come back here.
I think in the future too, when you start seeing when the homicides making through their costs.
Skyrocket. All right, thank you for that. Report from corporate services, what's that?
I'm good if you like, if you want.
I can. Think about it.
I can go through it. You can supplement it if you like. It's quite a comprehensive report on the, on our communications, center that, was put together by, Suzanne Bell Matheson, our analyst, Mark Grove, and, Chris Hill, our director from IT, and really shows how things went over the summer and, how they are now. Basically, that the volume is increasing in the communications center, the workload is increasing, but we're facing significant challenges with hiring and retaining staff there. So as of the end of August, the communications center was carrying 10 part-time communicator vacancies. In July, competition for full-time communicator was successfully filled from internal candidates. However, part-time communicator resignations and sick time during the past 3 months took a toll on mandatory overtime and unscheduled call-ins. For an example, in July, part-time communicator was off sick for most of the month, and their remaining hours for July, along with short notice sick hours, totaled 184 sick leave hours in July. So I had spoken before about full-time members. This is different stats here where we're dealing with part-time communicators here. The part-time communicator who resigned in July didn't show up for work and left immediately, adding another 216 hours that required coverage. Overall, in July, there were 400 hours of unscheduled call-ins and 144 hours of mandatory overtime. In August, a part-time communicator resigned, but continued working until the end of the month, and 2 additional part-time communicators who were still in training also resigned, with combined 204 hours of sick time in August, 104 hours of unscheduled call-ins, and 542 hours of mandatory overtime. Human resource staff shortages in communication center continue to be a significant issue that is being addressed. For example, a dedicated resource is now in place to conduct background investigations of potential hires, thereby expediting the process. For 911 calls during the 3 months of summer, there were 8,306 emergency calls from the 911 phone line. In June, 8,775, and that was for July, and 7,436 in August. July experienced a record high volume with an average daily rate of 283 calls per day. Although August rate dropped to 240 a day, it was up by 3.7% from August 2022. Year to date, as of the end of August, there will be 54,656 911 calls into the center, representing a 15.6 increase from 2022. In terms of daily rates, this is approximately 30 more 911 calls coming in so far in 2023 per day. The volume of no answer 911 calls, so your pocket dials, etc., is rose most significantly 1,285 in June, 1,129 July, and 921 in August. Although August numbers were down, the year to date, no answer 911 calls have increased 33.7%.
So just to comment on that, there was a software update that was brought up by one of the providers, one of the phone manufacturers, and that drove up numbers across Canada, across Ontario, across everywhere. Until that upgrade was, there was a patch done and sent out to everybody's phone. So there were software problems that caused that. So nothing that we're experiencing that other people aren't.
So from those 911 calls, there was increases of actual dispatch calls and of course increases of calls transferred to secondary PSAPs.
Sorry, just on those hangups, do you have to act on them, like even if you're still sending some?
You're still trying to, they have to make all efforts to try and identify where the call came from and address whether it was a genuine call for help or not. So
That's just massive.
Mhm. I plead guilty to one of them. I don't know how it happens.
Well, obviously it's too easy, right?
Let's skip ahead here. You can get the picture of the overall of the dramatic increases in the communications center. So on an IT side of things, over the last few months, the next gen 911 transfer tests with Toronto Fire and Oshawa EMS were completed. A new IT technician to support next gen 911 was hired, and once onboarded will begin with our communication center's necessary certification tests to go live. To date, no agency has yet completed these certification tests, but Toronto Fire is closer. Infrastructure work to support next gen 911 hosted solution is also underway. In addition, can that part be played?
I'm sorry. The financing?
No, just this 2 sentences above that.
Yeah, that's probably a little bit.
The communication center is also preparing a submission involving a site visit to provide dispatch services to Stratford Fire. That proposal is due in October. The center continues to grow and evolve. We're striving to maintain a balance of staffing that best aligns with workload demands, member wellness, emergency response standards, and contracted client expectations. In April 2022, the government announced an investment of $208 million over 3 years to enhance the next gen 911 system. OSPS is leveraging this funding opportunity and recently submitted a request to the Solicitor General for the next gen 911 2-year grant to help financially support the center's transition to the next gen 911 network.
So that was just over $900,000 that was submitted for year 2 funding. We received $700,000 in year 1.
And there's some very good graphs and charts here attached to the report. You can see that we have our 8 full-time positions in the center, and we're authorized to have 17. Which would be great, but we started the year with 8 part-timers. We went up to 13 part-time members by May, and by the end of August, we're back down to 7. So we're having quite a challenge trying to retain staff there.
We got some individuals lined up to start the end of this month. And interviews are continuing to hire, to identify more.
The rest of the graphs are related to calls for service. And that concludes communications center report.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, one of the things that I was just aware of this past week is that the new iPhone 15, which is just coming out, has all kinds of safety stuff, which I question your comment about calls. You just have to slip your finger and you call 911. It also now detects crashes and phones emergency people. So,
Great.
I mean,
Drop it on the floor.
Well-
Yeah, crash.
no, I don't know how,
So
whether
that-
that's going to affect or not, because it scared me when I read it. You say,
It does lead to a number of issues. Last year, the same, that was implemented last year and we
Yes.
received a number of 911 calls from people falling when they were skiing at Blue Mountain.
Yeah.
Because it indicated a crash. So we had a number of calls that we had to follow up and call back and make sure there wasn't in fact an emergency, because that automatically calls 911. If you touch the side button
Yeah.
5 times, automatically will dial 911 unless you change it in your setting. These are the software things I was mentioning that automatically will
Okay.
initiate a call to 911 that most people don't know and won't turn it off because they don't know to turn it off. And maybe a beneficial service if it's there, if you know about it, but those no answer 911 calls that we'd have to follow up on.
Change in how the phones operate, and also
Yes.
everybody above the age of 12 now has a phone, so there's an increase in phones up there as well.
I was just saying to John this morning that there is now a new operating system coming, iOS 17 for at least iPhone people. And that requires a manual to learn how to use it. You can't just download says, I've been told, be careful, don't download it, because it's gonna take months to figure out what it means,
All the features. yeah.
all the features. I mean, it'll even walk the dog, I think.
Great. Any other questions for Jeff on that? Moving on to report on information technology.
So IT's been really busy
Oh.
over the summer. Not just with tickets and looking after things, but grant writing. And banking down on one bills, different things. 114% increase in previous months for IT tickets open and closed. The other thing, they were assisting quite a bit with homicides and going out because a number of businesses have equipment but don't know how to operate it. So we end up having to go out and have our expertise. So they assisted with that and implemented a surveillance and video recording system of Saugeen Shores Police Service. That was a RFP that was responded to, and we were the successful bidder on that. And then the successful work on NG 901. So they've been quite busy. No further questions on that. I'll move on to the financials, and we have a finance director in place who is immediately qualified and doing a great job and is now caught up, and we've got our billings and the revenues, and we're caught up on that. And I'm just going to summarize, and I'll leave them with you to take. But the final numbers are the projection to the end of the year through the city finance director is approximately a $200,000 overage, and that was strictly, we were ahead of that, we were doing better until a significant amount of overtime over the summer with civilian branch for dispatch and significant hours of overtime for homicides. And we were probably closer to break even, and now with offsetting the costs, but the court security costs are about $200,000 over budget based on the amount of the grant from the province being decreased and the court security costs increasing because we're back in person, and those hours are increased over the previous year during COVID when the number of coverage was down. So we're that's about where we sit for the end of the year. I have no. Sorry. I have no standing account for payment, completed yet. We should start getting those back again now that, Mr. Hawks getting caught up. My activity reports, I think they're pretty, self-explanatory, subject to any document money collect during the release. Included that. We have holidays quite a bit in June. And we're on it, back at it. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Moving on to item number 18A, talks about donated funds to be protected. And I think this goes back to an issue that happened in January. And Craig, maybe you could provide some background and details on that.
Yeah, so there were,
Those are the issue.
so there were, when we were going through the finalized numbers for last year, there were donations made to the community safety officers programming by different community groups. And that was either through a request for a donation or for doing a presentation at service events and service clubs. And that money is traditionally always gone into that area for community services, and then they purchase items, oftentimes swag or promotional ideas for, giveaways for kids events. That money was just taken and absorbed into all of the police budget amounts. So we've transferred that back out, but certainly every year we have to watch for that, and not having somebody in the director, finance director's role made a concern. So we should be making sure that that money gets directed back to the following year, if it's not spent in the current.
Any questions, thoughts?
You put it in a separate reserve account or something, so as it doesn't get included, that we know it's gonna.
That would be the easiest.
All right, so we'll make a motion to the fact that any donated funds should be put into a reserve account. Sure. Right, thank you. Seconder for that, see, okay. All in favor? Carried. All right, moving on to bail compliance and ward apprehension.
So we, there's a compliance and warrant apprehension grant that was made public through the ministry, and just advised before that we made an application, significant application, $300,000 per year over 3 years, so not for a total $900,000 to come up with a bail compliance and apprehension fee. There's another pot of money that is distributed by the province to the courts and the ministry, Attorney General, so that they have specific grounds. We're trained in that area as well, and it's hopefully to for serious and violent offenses and all those repeat offenses, to make sure that people aren't just using the revolving door of the justice system, and there aren't people coming in and out of custody, coming in and out of the courts and no follow up to the problems. So we made that application. We haven't heard back on it yet. I would suggest that it was a strong application, that the numbers, as you saw earlier in the meeting, show the number of charges and the number of officers involved in that time. It speaks pretty clearly in the application that we are in need of doing something besides what we're doing currently.
And we received confirmation back that we've got that.
No, it's there's nothing that's been done. It's just an application that's been made.
Right, moving on to item D, A1 taxi address change. Did I skip Steve? I'm sorry. Oh, senior transportation service. Yeah, there's nothing brought up, but there's no presentation made, but I guess we should make a motion on for the license. So could I have someone to move that the license for senior transportation services application be deferred? All right, thank you.
Declined or deferred?
We've been using the term deferred at this point in time because it may come back in the future that we may use other information or something like that. Or we can use the term decline at this point in time.
I'd rather be firm.
Firm, okay. All right, so we'll be declined then. And Brian has made the motion, can I have a seconder? Ian, thank you. All in favor? Here. Now we can.
So as it came out in your, the A1 taxi address change came out, our licensing director has indicated the business office located on Third Avenue West. Looking for a new business address, they have two possible locations, so just advising them that they have to be in compliance with the bylaws as they're currently in place. And to amend their current business address since they moved.
This is for the city to make sure that there's something to play. Item number E, new procedures for technical standards authority.
Yeah, so the administrative directive came out for new procedures relating to technical standards authority. That's been passed along through Dave Preston, and our procedures have been updated to cover off those new standards.
Great. And next item, paid duty officers for planned events.
Yeah, so it's become an issue over the summer. Quite a few times that there are a number of events hosted, and every weekend there's something going on within the city. And there's obviously a significant cost to hiring paid duty officers. There's also a significant risk of not having any paid duty officers. And the demands on the police service are such that we can't guarantee that the officers are going to be available to attend at any of those events. And yet similarly, some of those events are that have been planned and that have been hosted are controversial, so in some regards, and anticipate a need for something further. So the discussion is that needs to take place is, are there further outlines, and then the further times that if you anticipate you're going to have something that's going to cause an issue, we can't be last minute told that this is going to happen. Similarly, any of these events, they're great for the city. They draw in a lot of individuals, they draw in a lot of interest, but the freedom that we just say that we'll have it covered off isn't there. So I'll throw it out to the inspectors as well for comments.
Yeah, no, that's what we're dealing with, is if somebody has an event that's going to draw thousands of people, and especially if it's an event where they're serving alcoholic beverages, or if there's entertainment provided, those increase the chances that there's going to be police calls for service. And it isn't even the calls for service, it's the fact that if people have those events and there's no police there, they try to augment it with private security. It doesn't have the same deterrence level as having police officers present at the events. So that's what we're seeing, and I'm expecting other groups that are holding large events to try. They've attempted before, but I think they're going to try and push to have no paid duty officers present at all. And that's an added cost that the service, number one, we can't respond as quickly as we would want to for some of the calls for service that are coming out of these events, and we just don't have the resources available. And I think the cost of that should be covered by the individuals that are having these events, and have paid duty officers there as a deterrent and be able to respond if there's incidents there.
Is there a general requirement that says if you're having a crowd, X number of people?
So I had an experience with that. And I thought that we would get support from the ATCO in relation to that. And it all comes around adequate security is what it's called. And the AGCO can't force them to have paid duty officers if they have security there. Now, there can be some outcomes if they have a number of incidents. They can have problems with getting the license again. They can be fined. etc. But as far as that teeth that we had years ago, where the AGCO said you'll be having police here, they didn't do that for me this time. They just said, well, they have security and that's about all we can do. So, and the private security, in some cases, they don't have the training, they don't have the authority, and they certainly don't have that deterrence level that a police officer would.
Could they use special constables as opposed to no, they can't use
No.
That's just sort of in between the security, private
Yeah,
security.
and again, they don't have the authorities that a police officer.
Yeah.
There's some differentiation, I guess, between for-profit events from something where it's a ticketed event or that sort of thing, and we also have a lot of special events on in town, parades, those sorts of things. Our staffing levels here are very typical parade day and that sort of thing. Historically, we've actually done very well community basis with volunteers, and we're getting a lot of regular volunteer officers to come in, but these events continue to get bigger and bigger and more of them, and it's just getting harder to get ready through the summer to expect that that's going to be happening. Although we do have our auxiliary, the auxiliary can't function on their own. They require police supervision and they are a supplement to help us out. So we still need that core of officers that are available, and when those events are going on, so are all the calls throughout the city. So they've always been a bit of a challenge for us, and it's just getting harder and harder to be able to keep those staffing levels up and rely on it being hey, if you don't mind giving up your Saturday to come in and help out, we'd appreciate it. So, I think that's the basis of the discussions. Where do we go with that? A lot of other municipalities, I believe, have gone quite some time ago to the paid duty thing, and that's part of those special events. When they plan them is to look at how they fund that or where that comes from. So we just historically, I think, been very good at trying to keep those costs down, but it's getting harder.
It's not bad, it's gonna happen, because adequate's not properly defined. And it'll change when something like that happens. Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
And similarly, there was an event planned at the library over the summer that was somewhat controversial, and 2 days before, you got a phone call saying, oh my goodness, there's gonna be protesters here and you have to come and deal with it. So everywhere else that event had arrived over the summer, been scheduled, they were having the same protesters and they were dealing with problems. So if you're gonna schedule an event like that at the library, there, you have to understand the repercussions of your decision and the fact that you're gonna call over and ask for something last minute, and it's very difficult for us to provide any of that, especially that was a weekend that week when some homicides took place.
That we were really in a spot that morning. That was a Saturday morning, and we were trying to patch together some resources to get down there and provide some security and trying to conduct a homicide investigation.
And that's just an example. And I mean, last week as well, there was and protests seem to be more common up in this area than they were in the past. So last week there was a protest and a counter protest. We all put 250 people present and some type of police presence required. And that's
The city wasn't advised, insurance wasn't provided. The opposing party decided they wanted to go and protest the protesters.
yeah, that's a
And
concern.
they're angry at the mayor because somebody yelled at them. I wasn't there to protect them.
Is there anything changed too? I noticed every time I go to the bank now, there's always security standing in the lobby. That's totally new for me. Why?
And that's something that has been a change, as we've seen some of the local businesses go to having private security. And with our homelessness situation, we do have people sleeping in the vestibules.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that becomes a place where people sleep and also use as a washroom sometimes. And so they have private security to make sure that's.
Thank you.
This isn't really for a decision, it's just for
For information.
discussion and information and being aware of the issue.
Right, thanks. Moving on to item G.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna go through this in length, obviously, we're running early late, I'm not often, we're meetings, but the operations plan, really the big thing about a successful operations plan is keeping it front and center and keeping it relevant to everybody that's doing it. And we haven't been doing this in the past, but certainly with the assistance of Mark, Glow in her position, and the new operations plan that we've implemented, we are starting to every 6 months provide input and updates. So as you've seen in your package, there are some milestones and some measurables that are provided for each of them. Now, I will provide the fact that, you know, we're inundated with work downstairs and CIB sergeant wasn't able to update it, and I've given them a pass on this 6 months, but there are a few different people who are impacted significantly by the workload, and I wasn't gonna put any more on their plate, but generally, you can see that there's a lot of work being done on putting and implementing and finishing off this plan by the end of the 3-year term, I guess 4-year term. So this is just in order to keep it up to date and refreshed, until the board is well aware of what's going on and the fact that it's front and center. They also having the positions accountable with people in the front line and having them involved in the design and structure of it really gets more buy-in and more participation by everybody in the service. So this is your 6-month update. If there's any questions, they can come up with the next meeting or anything if you haven't had a chance to review all of it. But really, we've made a lot of significant strides moving it forward. So if any
A
questions?
lot of work. No, I think there's done a lot of work on it, considering the resource shortage we faced over the summer. Especially. All right, moving on to item H, website update, and I think Craig gave some information on this. one.
Yes, this is just a verbal update. It took place rather quickly over the summer. We had an opportunity to, I would suggest, piggyback on the city's website redesign and make a significant savings as a result of that. Our website was outdated. It was designed by a company that we weren't working with anymore. Our own people, it wasn't user friendly. Our own people were having difficulty. I can attest to that. Updating and adding things to the website. So we were looking at options in the city at the same time, said there's probably savings as a result of the larger group and adding you into that economies of scale. So we went forward with that, and they've done some presentations, and just yesterday we had the initial, so the agreement's been signed with the city. We're a sub-partner on that, and we will pay our portion to transfer to the city. And we just yesterday afternoon at 3 o'clock, there was a first initial kickoff meeting and plans on how to update it and what it's going to look like. So we put a working group together of people who are in charge of the different areas, and Gail will be involved for the board, so that there's different calendars, different pages within that. It's a sub page for the cities, so it's just an update.
Kelly, did you have anything to add to that website? Because we had talked about updating our own website,
Yes.
creating our own website 2 months ago.
There's not working. There you go. What we're hoping to do with this similar look to the Wells police, so we'll piggyback off the town police. And so that it's kind of the feel that you see here, and it's easier to navigate. And then, so instead of it being at the very bottom of the page, it'll be easier for individuals to be able to access the police force website. And then on our website now, we currently have minutes, meeting schedule, mission statement, and board members, along with some important links. And these are some of the items the chair and I have discovered that we should add or either change. Board member chart to be rearranged and possibly incorporate some headshots to give people more visibility of who the police board is. Update board secretary to be changed to executive assistant with the updated email. Update the mission statement and add a message from the chair. Agendas will have to be put onto the website. And hopefully we'll be able to add in a subscribe button so that people can just automatically put them into their calendars. And then strategic business plan as well as bylaw and policies. And with that, the chair had mentioned that there's going to be an email being sent out. I'm going to send one at the beginning of October to ask for any input in regards to any additional content you want to see on the website or not see appear on the website, as well as what bylaw policies you would like to appear and again, would not like to appear on the website, and hoping to have a response back by October 20th so it can be brought to the October meeting. And again, I'll email that out with all of the dates and what's currently on the website.
Okay, good, thank you. Next up is towing and storage bylaw. Were you going to mention that under all chiefs memos in the close?
Yes, I think it's fair to say in open that there's been a change to the legislation within the province of Ontario in regards to towing. And it's there are a number of issues related to some of the in the GTA. Some, you know, there was violence amongst toll companies. There's a lot of people who were storing money from people once they had their car towed, and once it was hooked up, and storage fees were another issue. So the province has come up with some licensing and regulations in regards to the towing. And the reason to bring it here to the board is the bylaw wouldn't be congruent as it stands now with the new legislation. So the need will be for the bylaw to be updated so that it matches up with the new legislation and the fees related to the new legislation, et cetera. So that would be a job for our consultant to look after.
I've talked with Dave and I'm looking at the bylaw. Right now, we're very prescriptive within the bylaw about what you must do and fees and charges and everything else. Given that the MTO now has taken over all the prescribed things that a tow truck operator has to do, very basically and simplistically, our bylaw is going to say, follow MT road rules, and if you don't, then you don't get to be stored towing for us. Because really all we're doing is just towing a vehicle that's disabled to the side of the road, either our own vehicle or public, when there's been an accident, and then that vehicle is being stored for X amount of period of time. So even the storage bylaws or storage rules all fit into the MTO regs, so it has to look like. So it takes a lot of the responsibility on us, it's just a matter of making sure that people. So that's all right. So that'll probably come October, November timeframe with a new bylaw for us to approve that. Moving on to staff appreciation night.
This is just a reminder that the staff appreciation night is being held October 24th at Heartwood from 7 to 10. Everyone should have got an invite. And just an update and just a reminder, we'll hope to see you then.
And one item that I skipped over in governance. Sorry about that. Talking about bylaws and policies and things like that. Kayla, I think we have a dissertation to talk about.
Sure. The initiation of the board policy and bylaw review project began back in November 22. The project team collaborated with consultant Dave Preston to ensure compliance with the ministry guidelines and identify any absent policies or bylaws. Following a meeting on February 8th, the team assembled a comprehensive inventory of 24 bylaws and over 94 policies. During this process, the team discovered duplications, references to other policies or bylaws in need of updating, minor spelling errors, and discrepancies in language regarding financial reporting compared to the protocol agreement in 3 specific areas. On March 16th, 2023, a thumb drive containing the policies, bylaws, and a policy review document were distributed to all board members. Following that, a special board meeting was held on May 15th, 2023. During the meeting, the board, with the guidance of Dave Preston, the consulting assisting in the review, reviewed a total of 98 policies. With the exception of 7 policies, all others were reviewed and approved during the meeting. At the Owen Sound Police Service Board July 5th meeting, the board was presented with the following remaining policies that required updates. The remaining two, financial management policy and reimbursement of expenses have then been combined into one policy, a general policy of financial management. On August 22nd, the team convened again with Dave Preston to discuss the minor adjustments needed for the 7 remaining policies. The remaining policies are scheduled to be presented at today's meeting, and after receiving the approval, the policies will undergo signing by both the board chair and executive assistant. Subsequently, an electronic copy will be placed on the board drive, and hard copies will be kept in the office. And once the website review has been completed, approved policies and bylaws will be put onto the website.
Any questions on? So I guess what we're looking for is a motion for the final 7. Have a motion to approve the final 7 policies that were reviewed back in. Second. Right. All in favor? Thank you. All right, terminate public meeting at 12:27.